You're listening to author Jason Lee Willis read The Alchemist's Tomb. This is part 2, The Mediterranean. Chapter 8, Rome, Italy, 1852. William Drummond Stewart had been in perpetual motion for 20 years, and even after a night in one of Rome's finest hotels, he still felt the room moving. Of course, a few weeks sailing from Scotland to Rome didn't help, but it was more than just the recent trip. He rolled out of bed feeling old. His youthful enthusiasm could be coaxed into returning with just a cup of cappuccino, but his body could not be so easily fooled. Sure, he'd taken plenty of abuse during the Napoleonic Wars and his time on the frontier, but it was more of a dull ache in his bones that he felt waking up. His body simply did not want to go where his mind told him to go. He dressed plainly, poorly even. The razor scraped all the gray hair on his cheeks, chin, and upper lip. His hair, once his pride and joy, now daily mocked him in the mirror. After combing it across his scalp, he set a cream-colored hat upon his head to hide the bald spot and to add a few inches of height to help his fragile ego. For good measure, he tucked his new Colt pocket police revolver into his jacket for safe measure. Time to declare to the world that I'm a lunatic. He stepped out of the hotel room, locked the door, and took one pace across the hall. After knocking and a short wait, Christina answered. "I didn't think we had anything going on until noon," she said. She, too, looked worse for wear, and had yet to recover from their quick departure down the Tay River and subsequent trip across the Mediterranean. "We don't. I'm just going for a stroll. I'm taking McPherson with me. Frank will be down in the lobby if you need anything." A stroll? Christina had known him long enough to detect a lie, but she seemed too resigned to argue. Care to be more specific than that? "I've got a covert meeting with the Pope." "Fine, leave. Get killed in some back alley." And she closed the door. Carl Geyer stepped out into the hallway, fully dressed. "Well, I wish you well with the meeting. The hairs on my forearms are standing on end. It's hard to imagine such a thing exists." It might not exist. His brief relationship with Nicolette left him with keys to unknown doors. Today he meant to open one. "I hope I find out. Mr. Penny will stay here in the hotel with the women. Have you seen Jamie yet?" "I don't know. I just stepped out myself." "We're not even competent enough to wake on schedule," Stewart huffed, stepping around Geyer to loudly rap on the dwarf's bedchamber. "Perhaps he's already in the lobby," Geyer offered when the door remained closed. Another door opened. Ross McPherson. The young bearded man stepped out, also dressed in casual clothing, a sign he'd listened to Stewart's plans. "Ready for a cappuccino?" Stewart asked. Stewart eyed the thick hair and full beard. "One day you'll need a hat, too." McPherson checked his buttons. I'm a little nervous, actually." "So am I," Stewart admitted. "If the stories are true, this will be like meeting Santa Claus or the Loch Ness Monster. We'll see how the cappuccino goes. Is Anderson sleeping, or is he out still?" I heard him leave around midnight, but I fell asleep and didn't hear him return." Geyer shrugged to McPherson. "This isn't a good start." Stewart knew he could trust Geyer with any task or any secret. While Emma Geyer was an unknown factor, he knew Christina would keep her under wing. Ross McPherson's enthusiasm seemed predictable, and Frank Penny's machismo could be harnessed. But Jamie Anderson had a mind of his own. Perhaps he is in the lobby with Penny. Let's go find out. In the lobby, Frank Penny waited, wearing his Texan cowboy hat. It was decided before the trip that the young hired gun did not have nearly enough acting chops to hide his identity. But since he was a nobody from nowhere, a traveling Texan might distract eyes from the known members of the party. As a result, he sat upon a couch, legs spread wide, wearing a leather vest with holsters on his ribs. Frank, have you? Curled up on a big chair in the corner, Jamie Anderson slept. Is he drunk? Stewart asked. Just tuckered, Penny said. He was out much of the night. I'm half a man and need much less sleep, Anderson said without opening his eyes. At Stewart's sigh, he groaned and rolled to his feet. I'm ready when you are. I'm worried you're not taking this seriously, Stewart chided, stepping closer to tower over him. Anderson shrugged. Not serious? I spent the past few hours scouting the route and making observations. I'm hours ahead of both of you. Would you like to know the future, or shall I let Geyer experience it firsthand? 3 decades of buffoonery balanced against Anderson's loyalty. Okay, I was wrong. Penny, the ladies will be in your care. 1 penny is worth 100 other men, the youth quipped, tapping the hilt of his revolver. Stewart extended his hand to Geyer and shook it firmly. Good luck on your tour. I'm looking forward to your report once we all convene back here. Have a good morning. He turned to his own escort. Ready, Mr. McPherson? No, McPherson said, and then chuckled. But let's go see about that cappuccino. The 2 groups separated. Once outside, Stewart turned back to see Geyer and Anderson heading in the opposite direction. The Templum Gentis Flaviae was only a few blocks from the hotel in the shadow of the Colosseum. But like most of Rome, each block was an archaeological treasure chest. Although Geyer's trade was botany, his meticulous nature and attention to detail would turn his 3-hour private tour into 2 days' worth of peculiars. While his scientist friend could catalog every aspect of the trip, Jamie Anderson's discerning mind and curious nature would complement the tour. Those answers to Stewart's questions would have to wait for a few hours. He and McPherson were about to meet with one of the men who set Nicolette on his quest decades earlier. Is this it? Stewart asked as Ross McPherson looked around the facade of the block. 4 tables and a single door were the only identifying features of the inconspicuous cafe. It is. Do we just sit down? Apparently, Stewart said as he reflected on the instructions originally intended for Nicolette. Stewart watched with bemusement as Ross McPherson's head pivoted like a curious prairie dog. In the course of a year, the defrocked priest's physical attire had changed. He wore a long beige leather coat and a turtleneck sweater that met his thick beard. Youthful vanity for a bruised ego. Any moment on the street captured his attention as if the second coming of Christ was about to happen. After a few minutes of sitting, a haggard young man who looked hungover stepped out of the door to take their order. I'm a thirsty wolf pup in need of a suckle, Stewart crisply said in Latin before finishing the secret request with, I'd like a demitasse of Kapuziner. McPherson's meaningless order followed. When the waiter stepped back inside, McPherson asked, So how does this work? For all we know, we'll get a cup of cappuccino and return to the hotel. Relax, Mr. McPherson. This could be a wild goose chase. I think it's real, McPherson insisted. Is this your first trip to Rome? Stewart asked. Oh, no, I've been here hundreds of times in books. I studied it long before you came into my life. It seems so much more expansive and cleaner, I must admit, but the density of the architecture is stunning. Everything is hidden in plain sight, isn't it? Indeed it is. The haggard waiter returned, setting down 2 saucers with near disdain. Stewart wondered if it was a performance or if the gatekeeper truly was a hungover waiter. The response to their request didn't come immediately. "Does seeing Rome change your view of the church?" Stewart asked after slipping the drink and cleaning the film from his bare lip. He still missed his distinct mustache. "Well, Rome isn't Vatican City, is it?" McPherson said. "The river seems to separate Christianity and paganism. The Pope is over there, and our fellow is somewhere around here." He avoided the question. The brilliant young scholar from the Edinburgh Theological Seminary had been a priest for only 3 short years. Then an affair with the wife of a prominent merchant flared up into an entire scandal, resulting in the defrocking of the promising young priest. Having endured scandal aplenty, Stewart offered sanctuary and friendship. Stewart tested countless theories in his debates with the handsome young priest. Now, the young man followed him on an insane hunt. "So have you read the legend behind the founding of Rome?" McPherson asked. "Yeah, Anderson tried explaining it to me, but I don't recall the details. Surely, though, you're familiar with the 2 popular legends from mythology about how the city was created?" At Stewart's nod, McPherson continued. "The tale of the Trojan War has Aeneas leading the survivors to Italy, where he established the city right here. The other tale interests me even more. It tells of 2 babes, Remus and Romulus, and how they were raised by a she-wolf. Romulus, of course, is where the name Rome derives. Have you read tales about werewolves?" Stewart scoffed, scanning the crowd for Nicolette's contact. "Go ahead, pass the time." "The most popular legend comes from the wild region in Greece known as Arcadia, and the legend of Lycaon, who Zeus turned into a wolf. But there are other stories from the Norse and the Black Forest of Germany about men periodically transforming into wolves. My favorite is the tales from Romania involving Zalmoxis, who was a shape-shifting god the Getae people worshipped. If McPherson ever gets taken prisoner, he'll wear the torture out in an hour with his ramblings. What is the point about your werewolf legends?" "There is a possible connection between the Getae, Romulus, and," he lowered his voice to a whisper, "and the periphery." Stewart nodded, but also rolled his eyes. "Aren't you at least stimulated by the thought of meeting with a secret society that has existed for thousands of years?" Nicolette had told Stewart about his encounters with the periphery. Hours ahead of an assassination by the Carbonari and the riots of the July Revolution, a periphery agent using the name Giacca rescued him, sending him off on a quest that eventually led to the various headwaters of the Mississippi River. Now, instead of Nicolette, Stewart came to Rome with more questions than answers. "I worry about what they think of your plan, of our plan. If they want it stopped, they'll simply let our enemies know where to find us." "The periphery will be our ally in the coming fight," McPherson naively boasted. "It's rumored that these are the same people who came to the aid of Moses during his darkest hour." "Excuse me? Werewolves, shadows, caves. The man who rescued Moses was a priest of God, but neither Hebrew nor Levite. Ruel, according to the historians, was from a tribe of people associated with caves. The troglodytae, as Herodotus described them, spoke of a secret language and existed for centuries before Moses. That puts the periphery at almost 4,000 years old." Nicolette would have loved talking with this man. "Doesn't the obvious symbolism worry you at least?" "Why? The periphery implying the men of the shadows? To be a covert, benevolent force, you certainly can't blow trumpets in the streets," McPherson insisted. "Nicolette should be spending his golden years in a secluded library. Instead, he is in a tomb I built for him. Don't be swayed by the grandeur of Rome, Ross." 30 minutes of silent waiting ended with a tall, elderly gentleman walking directly toward them from the streets. He paused, sighed, and muttered, "That's my table." He looked around in agitation at the other choices before muttering, "Tourists. Is this Nicolette's man?" The elderly gentleman pulled out a metal chair from a nearby table, hesitated, and then loudly dragged it over to their table, declaring, "This is where I meet my friends each day. Do you mind if I join you so that after you leave, I don't have to worry about another group of tourists taking the spot?" "We're meeting with someone also," McPherson protested. Stewart placed a hand on McPherson's arm to stop him from saying more. "Yes, I know." Stewart studied the man. The stranger was a tall and perhaps once quite athletic, but the deep wrinkles in his eyes and the corners of his mouth revealed a man in his 70s or 80s. His eyebrows were almost absent, but his thin mustache still had flecks of hair that once was ebony. His hairline was hidden by a black fedora kept remarkably clean. He extended a big hand, wrinkled with age spots, that tried to crush Stewart's hand in it when they shook. "Conrad Simmons." "William," Stewart answered tartly. "But my friends call me Captain Billy." Stewart turned his gaze to young McPherson. "I'd hoped to meet the Métis. His reputation made me curious about what the man was like in real life." "He's out on errands," Stewart answered in reference to Antoine Clement. "This is the same man Nicolette told me about. This is the one who sent him on the quest for the Philosopher's Stone." A seminarian in the 1790s would now be nearly 80, which matched the man's age. "You were a friend of the watchmaker's son?" "And the watchmaker himself. I owe my life to the entire family for sheltering us from the mob. Because of him, I've led quite a life, even reporting directly to 2 popes. I'm now retired, but when your letter arrived, I requested to meet with you personally. Any friend of the watchmaker's son is a friend of mine." The smile then vanished, and his brow narrowed skeptically. "This fellow, however, I'm not so sure about." "Ross McPherson." McPherson extended his hand, but dropped it when Simmons shook his head and leaned back. "I know who you are. You seem to draw a lot of attention to yourself. Stubborn, willful, insolent, driven by ego. Throughout your schooling and years in the seminary, you relished challenging authority. Was it for ego or simply to get to the heart of the matter?" Simmons asked rhetorically. "It makes no difference now, does it? You were caught having an affair with a noblewoman, which led to a few other accusations. It seems your sexual appetite was as large as your academic appetite." "The accusations were an attempt to remove you from your position. Lord Stewart saw through the ruse, which is why he armed himself with such an impressive weapon in his arsenal. Throughout the known world, there are corrupt priests sitting on a daily basis, and most of the time it is overlooked. Did you ever wonder why your behavior was noticed?" Having lost countless arguments to the young man, Stewart found a grin creeping on his face as the brash young academic squirmed in his seat. All McPherson could do was shrug weakly. "You stuck your nose into areas the church didn't want questioning. Adultery is easily explained, but orthodoxy is much more difficult to defend, and you were seeking answers for questions that dared not be asked. Luckily for you, Lord Stewart was already asking himself the same questions," Stewart concluded, and turned his hot gaze away from the defrocked priest. He leveled his gaze on Stewart. "Have you heard any news from the frontier about Father de Smet? He's all but stepped off the map into the wilderness." "Father de Smet mourns the loss of Nicolette in much the same way as I do. He's dedicated himself to the welfare of the Indian out on the frontier. He knows what is coming," Stewart said, thinking of his dear friend. "Clement would like to find a way to meet with him." "Will de Smet forgive Clement his mortal sins?" "We tried to save the professor," Simmons boldly claimed. "On several occasions we tried to pull him from the waters, knowing he was drowning, but he was determined, wasn't he? Unfortunately, his enemies were even more determined. Is that why you've come, to learn more about your enemy?" Stewart shook his head. "No, I know more about my enemy than I want to know. Nicolette delayed when he came close to the truth. I want to discuss what gave him pause." "Delayed? What are you implying?" Simmons' eyes narrowed. They might have killed Nicolette, but he did not fail in the task you gave him. We believe he found the Philosopher's Stone, yet did not claim it. Why? Who knows what would have happened if he had lived, but in death, he let me know his theory about the stone and the maps. You received the portrait, didn't you? We knew you'd likely pick up the torch to continue the quest, Simmons noted and asked. And what is his theory? The professor realized that the quest for the Philosopher's Stone went beyond the creation to the creator. All I asked him to do was investigate the tales surrounding Lesueur and Lahatan, and by the time he died, he was studying the mysteries of Atlantis. What do you know about the philosopher who created the stone? Not much. My specialty was dealing with modern threats to the church, which is how I learned so much about the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Carbonari, the Order of Eos, and even newer threats. I know the Order of Eos was eager to let Nicolette lead them to the figurative needle in the haystack. As much as I regret saying it, perhaps his delay was for the best. So can you confirm that this quest goes beyond just acquiring the stone? Our family has roots in the Order of Eos. You likely know about their obsessions better than the Pope does himself. Yet we didn't go to the Vatican City, did we? Stewart asked and glanced over at McPherson, who'd barely moved a muscle and nervously kept his hand under the table. Nicolette boldly championed the commission given to him by the Periphery. And if I'm going to continue his mission, I need to understand what I should do if I find something of great value. Simmons laughed heartily. When God looked down upon the earth in the early days of the Christian church, he didn't pick the most righteous follower. No, he found a murderous investigator named Saul traveling on the road to Damascus. What happened to Captain Billy following his baptism in St. Louis? I see Saul in front of me, yet I hear Paul. Oh, I'm more murderous investigator than saint. My younger brother was determined to become a cardinal, yet he was killed by the same enemies who killed Nicolette. I know what Eos believes. Now, I need to understand what the Periphery believes. I'm afraid I don't have those answers, Simmons said, but I know a man who does. Luckily, the old man wants to meet you. Chapter 9. Rome, Italy, 1852. Ross McPherson kept his mouth shut as he trailed Lord Stewart and Conrad Simmons on their tour through the Capitoline Museum. The finest art and sculptures in Europe were gathered upon the Capitoline Hill, a complex that had few rivals on earth. He took note of the steps that arose above the city by several stories. Although once he reached the top, the complex had a flat plateau upon which the Piazza del Campidoglio had been built. Everything was bright and open and blatantly pagan, which surprised him. Although statues of Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, had been one of the earliest stops, McPherson could only contrast the Vatican with such a shrine to Rome's pagan past. Neither Simmons nor Stewart seemed too interested in it at all. The two talked about the construction of the new museum by Michelangelo. Seeing public nudity, even if in polished marble, made Ross's mind fixate on Lady Lithgow. The accusers had been liars, but his affair with Lady Lithgow had been very real. It started with her earnest questions, or so it seemed. She seemed impressed by his knowledge, and he liked to show off, so the two lingered in an act that could only be viewed as righteous. Then the relationship became a friendship, and he became a listener whenever she had troubles. Becoming a shoulder to cry on became an offer for tenderness, and in one sudden wave of emotion, he was caught up in a moment that led to other moments, and then a pattern. Within the span of a year, his career came crumbling apart. If I'd shown a bit of restraint, I'd still be back in Scotland. His regret and guilt suddenly abated in the magnificence of the museum. About the same time his career in the church ended, his acquaintance with Lord Stewart began. He'd heard all about the sexual exploits of Captain Billy, spanning his military days to his time out on the frontier with his mountain men. His relationship with Anton Clement was discussed, even though McPherson only saw ashes and embers of what had once been a fire. Stewart's wild days had gone by the wayside, and he was left with yearning to understand the mysteries of the Bible. Once Ross's scandal broke, Stewart offered a place to hide from the spotlight. While Stewart's comfort was far from lonely Lady Lithgow's, his was a genuine curiosity rather than an elaborate seduction. Lost in thought, McPherson wasn't ready for Stewart to shake hands with Simmons, who abruptly walked away from the tour without providing them any of the answers. What was the purpose in meeting Simmons? Another gatekeeper, perhaps? Stewart kept walking as if he knew where to go. Finally, McPherson saw their destination. Ah, there it is, the infamous she-wolf. The metal statue was almost comical. The she-wolf had little realism to an actual wolf and showed a rigid posture and impassioned expression as she stood over two infants stretching to suckle from its teats. Scholars described the she-wolf statue as dating all the way back to the 1st century. So what do we do now? Stewart walked around the statue, noting everything except the wolf. Now we just wait and see. While they waited, McPherson took in the ambiance of the museum. For almost 2,000 years, Rome had been one of the epicenters of the world, so it made sense for a secret society to have a headquarters in such a place. During that time, Rome had endured much political turmoil and invasion, but the ancient part of the city, along with the statue, endured. So what does this have to do with the men who tried to kill Stewart? McPherson wondered, and turned from the art to the crowd. An old man came toward them, sweeping the floor as he approached. Stewart froze and watched. "The old man wants to see you," is what Simmons said to us. The custodian did not seem much older than Conrad Simmons, and if anything, he was a few years younger. Shorter and stockier, his beardless cheeks were smooth with just a few wrinkles in the corner of his eyes, which took notice of them since they outright were staring at him. The custodian finished pushing a small pile into the dustpan, set the broom down, and leaned against the base of the she-wolf. "First time in Rome?" the custodian asked. Stewart gasped a little, leaving his mouth agape. Then he stepped back, falling onto the ground like a peasant caught stealing from his master. Seeing Lord Stewart grovel was so sudden and out of character that McPherson almost chuckled aloud. Who is this old man? While he assumed it was some high-ranking member of the periphery, the humility shown disarmed him a bit. The custodian was not flattered by Stewart groveling on the ground. "Rise. Quit acting the part of a fool. I am a fellow servant. Kneel before God, not me." McPherson looked around to see if any other visitors were amused by the comical scene. Fortunately, the moment was private. "Yes," Stewart said, still averting his eyes and rising to his feet. We're honored to be allowed this meeting with you." Boredom got the better of me. In your recent letters, you wrote you had important matters of theology to discuss. Do you still have questions? "I do." "Splendid. There are many visitors to Rome, so let us find a more comfortable spot." The comfortable spot was a stone bench in the middle of the museum plaza. Dozens of people milled around, but none of them paid attention to the three sitting down. "How can I help you?" the custodian asked. Donning the attire of a servant, the man was meticulously groomed, and despite looking to be about 75, he appeared strong and healthy. Stewart took a deep breath, glanced at McPherson, and asked the first question. "Are you familiar with the lost continent of Atlantis?" The custodian chuckled. I am, but I am hardly an expert." Stewart continued. There are many other cultures besides the Greeks that speak of an island, continent, or civilization that was destroyed in a single day by a catastrophe. The point of Atlantis is that a civilization existed long before the one we know. The custodian's eyebrow raised. You speak of the great flood of Genesis. Is that why you have come to visit? As I previously stated, I am hardly an expert on matters of antiquity. Stewart smirked like he did when playing cards. I think you might understand antiquity better than I. I'm not interested in the flood, but instead in a man who existed before humanity's most recent cataclysm. From what I can tell, the Order of Eos is interested in this fellow as well. And over the centuries, I've found as many references to him and his creation, which we call the Philosopher's Stone. The custodian hummed. In recent years, I've also developed an interest in the legend of the Philosopher's Stone. I mourned the death of Professor Nicolet, and I fear my interest in this ancient relic led him to an untimely death. Ross tried to guess the identity of the custodian. For a brief moment, he thought it might have been an undercover Pope Pius IX, until he remembered the Pope's bulldog face in contrast to the custodian's leaner, darker complexion. Stewart shook his head. Nicolet was relentless. Death was the only thing to stop his insatiable curiosity, which, in turn, has become my newest quality as well. I wish we could be here today to hand you the Philosopher's Stone, but instead I only have these 2 items to offer, Stewart declared, motioning to McPherson to retrieve the satchel. Feeling a bit in the dark as to the custodian's true identity, McPherson released a long sigh before pulling the strap over his head and handing it to Stewart. Stewart paused after unlatching the buckles. Many men have died attempting to acquire these. My dear friend died because of this. My aunt died because of this. Stewart produced 2 tubes from the satchel. The custodian took possession of the tubes. He held them with a slight grin on his face, as if he could see through them. Are these the 2 maps that have caused such a ruckus in recent years? Stewart nodded. The Alchemist map was made by King Solomon himself, who sent an expedition to the far side of the world to search for an ancient treasure meant to aid him in the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. While they searched, Solomon grew impatient and turned to dark magic to create his own version of the Philosopher's Stone. The doomed expedition eventually found its way back home. And a second map, made by Aberon, was created that chronicled this journey to the far side of the world. And the race to find the ancient king's tomb began anew, the custodian summarized Stewart. His face suddenly bore pained guilt. I know of many men who have died trying to acquire these maps. Some went on my behalf. The agents of the periphery keep me informed. It hardly seems as if you need my help at all. You've solved a great puzzle on your own. McPherson knew Stewart wanted to ask about the 7 kings theory and watched patiently as Stewart measured his words. What can you tell me about the Philosopher's Stone's maker? McPherson felt himself sitting on the edge of his seat. Although he didn't know the identity of the old man, he knew Stewart had pulled every string at his disposal to get this audience in Rome. He assumed he'd been brought along in case Stewart had private questions or to help translate Latin into English. The custodian's brow wrinkled as if weighing his words. Finally, he relaxed and opened the end of the Alchemist map tube. I think the answer has been in front of you the whole time. Symbolism is often elusive until the meaning is explained. The custodian unrolled the map of the world created by King Solomon. McPherson knew it well already. Half of the map showed the known world in the year 1000 BC, with the most detailed area showing the Holy Lands. Sir, that is a very important document. The old man winked playfully. If Joseph Nicolet indeed found the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone, then these maps are now worthless, aren't they? McPherson nodded at the logic. The old man studied the stars along the outer border of the map, and finding the northern side of the map, quickly identified the North Star. In Solomon's wisdom, he knew the kingdoms and empires had changed, but the stars remained the same. His navigators used stars to find the ancient land where the stone was buried. Yes, it's what Nicolet used to calculate the approximate latitude, Stewart commented. McPherson saw it and quickly interpreted the symbolism. The Big Dipper has 7 stars. Do they represent the archangels? The custodian's scoffing chuckle made McPherson wish he'd kept his mouth shut. He'd heard Stewart's fears about about 7 evil kings leading to the ultimate evil, the Antichrist. Yet nowhere in known scholarship did McPherson find any support. So Stewart insisted on coming to Rome for answers. To the Greeks, the 7 stars combined to make the image of a beast, a bear. These 7 stars point to an 8th star, which then makes a smaller yet significantly more important beast. A gasp escaped McPherson's lips as the custodian hit the nail on the head. The red dragon and the Antichrist. He looked to Stewart, who nodded in affirmation. Stewart turned to the custodian. I became so fixated on the legend behind these maps that I couldn't imagine the whole picture. Nicolet understood the whole picture. His imagination not only allowed him to picture the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, but also its ultimate purpose. Stewart turned to McPherson. Can you explain our theory to him? McPherson swallowed hard. The Bible is filled with countless sevens, but in the book of Revelation, there is a 7-headed dragon, a beast from water. When St. John asked the angel the meaning of the 7 heads, he is told that each head represents kings, 5 who were born, 1 who was alive, and 1 who had not yet been born. These 7 kings would precede the worst of them all, the figure known as the Antichrist, who is the 8th. McPherson put his finger on the map to illustrate. The Big Dipper has 7 stars, and the 2 pole stars point to the 8th, which is the Antichrist. Stewart breathed a sigh of relief, a sign McPherson stated it correctly. Does he have the interpretation correct? It's different in Aramaic, and translating it into Latin and then into English certainly didn't help matters. But yes, that is basically what it says. The old man smiled and patted McPherson on the shoulder. McPherson suddenly felt like a child who'd been given a large lollipop. We also have come to you about the application of this theory, Stewart added. The Order of Eos stands in opposition to the Catholic Church in thought, word, and deed. And from what I've discerned, they are searching not only for the stone, but also for its creator. The custodian vocalized loudly. He scratched his chin like a man who'd once worn a beard. Earlier, you asked me about the Philosopher's Stone creator, and King Solomon's map included the 7 stars for the reason we just spoke. Solomon knew his recent history and how the sons of darkness, Eos as they're now called, searched for an even older king, a king that existed before the most recent cataclysm, as you put it. The custodian put the finger near the bottom pole star. Merrick, the loin of the beast. Is that the name of the ancient king who made the Philosopher's Stone? Stewart asked. Merrick? The custodian shrugged. Perhaps. That's what the ancient Phoenicians called him. which is where the name of your map comes from, Almaric. The ancient Hebrews called this man Lamech. The father of Noah? McPherson asked. No, the offspring of Cain. Stewart stiffened his back and looked around the sheltered square where they sat. What agitated him, McPherson wondered. Finally, Stewart muttered, Veritas caput. Indeed, the custodian said, the truth about the head. We learned that your friend, Professor Nicollet, began researching the legend of Atlantis in the months before his death. Just like the name of the stone's creator changes in the telling, so too does the name of his ancient kingdom. This is when we knew Nicollet was searching for the first star of the seven-headed beast. Merrick, Stewart repeated. The map was in our family library for 2 centuries, and I never understood the meaning of its name, Almaric. I suppose Nicollet put it together the moment he read the name. His keen mind went to the core of the mystery faster than all of Nebuchadnezzar's collection of magi here in Rome could ever do, the custodian added. So the Philosopher's Stone was only proof of where the head was located. If you found the stone, you'd also found caput mortem. So the Jesuits were trying to find the head before the Order of Eos could find it. The stone was inconsequential. The custodian shook his head. You are right about the Jesuit interest. Our agents work within their midst. And since rumors of the blue vitriol came to light, we've been sending men out into the frontier to stay ahead of Eos. But you were wrong to say the stone was inconsequential. Just as the 7 kings have a part to play in the 8th king, the Antichrist, I believe that the Philosopher's Stone might be a key in bringing about the end times. Perhaps Stewart is not a madman after all, McPherson decided. Our theories are all being confirmed. Stewart bent down as if he might be sick and breathed heavily while looking at his toes. He groaned a bit. Tell me, if Nicollet had found the Philosopher's Stone, what should he have done with it? The custodian shrugged. It matters not, he said, and looked up to the open air of the courtyard within the museum. The Lord will use either saint or sinner for his mysterious purpose. It matters not, McPherson recoiled. So what are we supposed to do now? You just stated that the Philosopher's Stone is a key to bringing about the end times, Stewart angrily repeated. Might be the key, the custodian wryly corrected Stewart. I'd have to see it to know for certain. So you counsel that we bring it to you here in Rome? The custodian again shrugged. Across the Tiber, the Pope tries to shape the politics of the world, but on this side of the river, we trust the plans of God. Even the end times will arrive as they were meant to arrive. The periphery exists to nurture the flock, especially those in need. Yet the great cosmic clock is ticking down. You might be far too young to hear it, but an old man such as I can hear it ticking away to the inevitable. So you counsel that we do nothing? Stewart asked. Of course not. You are men of action, and I have a hunch that after our brief meeting, you'll be racing around the world trying to thwart the sons of darkness. Stewart collected himself and stared at the man with steely resolve. And how would I thwart the sons of darkness? For their plan to succeed, the Philosopher's Stone is key. And without it, they will be searching for more than just the elusive king known to Solomon as Almaric. If you look into their northern tales, you'll find that the Northmen also believed in resurrection, albeit much different than the resurrection of the Christ. For their evil designs to come true, They will be looking for all 7 kings. The custodian pointed to the symbol of the Big Dipper on the map in front of them. Then, for my part, Stewart said, positioning himself in front of the old man, I will thwart these sons of darkness. And I'll be at his side, McPherson added, caught up in Stewart's earnest bluster. With levity on his face, the old man rose. If you mean to call down fire from the sky to consume your enemies, you might be surprised how your prayers will be answered, the custodian said. Is there anything else you need to ask me today? McPherson reviewed. They had wanted to learn about the crater of the Philosopher's Stone, and now they had multiple names. They wanted to know what to do with the Philosopher's Stone, and now they knew to bring it back to Rome. They looked for confirmation that the Order of Eos searched for fallen kings, and the rumor was affirmed. They even knew how to get revenge against Eos by stealing any of the corpses sought by Eos. Stewart shook his head, but McPherson's hand dove into the recesses of the satchel. If there are indeed 7 kings, McPherson began as he searched for the right piece of paper, what can you tell us about those who came after the flood? Beyond Merrick, who are the other kings written in the stars? I also pondered the 7 kings' prophecy after I heard it. If you seek answers, I'll look for them in places in Scripture. I'd look for them in other places in Scripture. Ah, McPherson interrupted. Here is our list. In his enthusiasm, he handed it to the custodian, who looked it over and nodded. How did you come up with these names? Stewart answered. Many were suggested to me by Nicolette. May God's grace guide you on your journey, but I fear many of the tombs have already been plundered by the sons of darkness. The periphery will not interfere in your quest and will watch your efforts with great interest. The custodian stood and collected the 2 maps. Do you still need these? Stewart shook his head. As you said, they are worthless if Nicolette indeed found the resting place of the stone. The custodian tucked them under his arm, found his broom leaning against a nearby wall, and went back to work sweeping. He disappeared around the corner. That was strange, Ross said under his breath. You have no idea how strange, Stewart said. Once we are far away from Rome, I'll tell you more about the rumors about the old man. He stood up, got his bearings, and began walking back in the direction of the hotel. As they reached the threshold of the Capitoline Museums, Ross turned back for a final glance. In the distance, he saw the custodian drop the 2 maps in a trash can and continue sweeping. Chapter 10. Rome, Italy, 1852. Karl Geyer's heart beat heavily in his chest. Granted, much of it came from the exertion of the tour, but his heart also raced knowing he was on a secret mission for Lord Stewart. Between his own panting and Jamie Anderson's short legs, their private tour went block by block. Perhaps I'm too old and out of shape for adventures. The hired guide waited for them to catch their breath. Geyer moved to stand under the Arch of Titus as their guide began his narration. This arch was built as a monument to Titus, the general who defeated the Jews following their violent revolt. You can see one of the only contemporary depictions of King Herod's temple upon its surface. I've seen the same thing in Paris, Jamie Anderson declared. It was built by Napoleon after he crushed the Catholic Church, Karl Geyer explained and then muttered, 2 enemies of God. The guide hesitated at Geyer's comment. Who had this arch built? Emperor Domitian, Titus's brother, the guide explained. Perhaps Nicholas was right about the 7 kings, Geyer thought, swallowing hard while trying to maintain his composure. Based on their behavior out on the frontier, the Jesuits were sure to be spying on them. Stewart insisted earlier, but they were more interested in Stewart than his lesser companions. So Geyer and Anderson went on the secret fact-finding mission. Stewart and McPherson put together the Nicolet list of 7 kings from history that fit clues found in the scripture, as well as figures known to the Order of Eos. King number 1 had been the nameless philosopher from the Philosopher's Stone legend, and while there was dispute with several candidates, consensus was reached for king number 6. Domitian, Geyer bluffed. Never heard of him. I'd like to learn more about him. Lead on. The guide nodded and led to what remained of the Templum Gentis Flavia. Anderson huffed and followed behind. While Stewart and McPherson sought confirmation about their theories, Geyer and Anderson had a much more specific task: locating a tomb. Geyer had always been more of a scientist than a theologian, so the details of the theories caught him off guard a bit. Yet he had the gist of it. The first king was the ancient alchemist who created the Philosopher's Stone in an ancient land, which is where Clement and company had been sent. One king had been alive in the year 95 AD when St. John wrote the Apocalypse. The 7th king had not arrived yet and would appear shortly before the end times began in earnest. Nicolet insisted that king had been Napoleon based on the evil chaos he'd sown in Europe. McPherson vehemently disagreed. Yet all 3 theologians agreed upon Domitian. When they reached the designated spot, Geyer reached into his pocket for a wad of Stewart's money. I think my friend and I are going to forego the rest of the tour in favor of some refreshment at the little cafe over there. We thank you for your wonderful hospitality. The wad of money sent the tour guide scurrying. So now what? Anderson asked as he played along and found a chair. He immediately began rubbing his legs. We eat and drink and keep an eye out for spies following us. The Jesuits? Most likely, since Eos doesn't know our destination was Rome. Geyer repeated Stewart's earlier comment. Since vanishing from Scotland, they hadn't made a public appearance until today. However, Eos could still have embedded spies watching, so we'll play the part of tired tourists for the better part of an hour before continuing. Anderson had no problems with that, and after ordering, he leaned back and even napped. So, tell the truth, Anderson said as he grew bored of napping. Is Stewart a lunatic? Is he following an even greater fool than this Nicolet fella? Nicolet was one of the greatest men I've ever known in my life, Geyer began angrily. Back in 1843, he'd been one of the sheep ready to orchestrate the heist before wolves killed their shepherd. Now he felt as if he owed Nicolet his life and that he had to prove the professor correct. I would have died for that man. He was one of the kindest, most brilliant men I ever known, and if his theory about the creator of the stone and the 7 kings is true, then I have even more motivation to continue. Anderson wrinkled his forehead as his mouth opened and closed. I see. He turned to his cup and finished his beverage. Thanks for the insight, but Stewart and McPherson were yapping so quickly that I'm not quite sure I understand what we're about to do next. What are we doing? Checking to see if a grave is occupied or empty, Geyer answered bluntly. Stewart trusted the dwarf, but Geyer still disliked him. Yes, Anderson said, procuring the directions given to him by McPherson. I've got all the little dirty details written down, but cut to the end of the madness. What are we really doing? Geyer swam in the theory's details himself. Apparently, our enemies, Eos. Apparently, our enemies believe they will be able to summon their god if they gather together 7 fallen kings and resurrect them with the Philosopher's Stone. Resurrect? How's that supposed to work? That's why everybody and their mother was searching for the Philosopher's Stone. It holds some secret ability to bring the dead back to life. And their talk about the Antichrist? The flip side to the prophecy seems to match many of the details, except instead of a fallen god, they'll be summoning the Antichrist. But why do we care if Jesus shows up at the end of it all and brings us a happy ending filled with flowers and butterflies? Isn't our mission just delaying the inevitable? Stewart wants revenge for the death of his brother, so he wants to hurt Eos by stealing control of their prophecy. By stealing a corpse, Anderson scoffed. Geyer chuckled at the absurdity of it. I'm also a little fuzzy on his intentions. He and McPherson talked on and on about fate, free will, and destination, as the good guys were hoping to keep these corpses and relics out of the hands of the bad guys for as long as possible. I understand. Every man is destined to die. The end times. Yet it depends on free will whether the man exercises and stays fit, or whether he eats himself into an early grave. In this metaphor, Eos would be the fat man. Geyer thought for a moment of flipping the table over and choking the dwarf. As a young man, Geyer had accepted a challenge from one of Chief Wahanaten's braves and almost won a wrestling match. Compared to that man, Anderson would be easy. Yes, Eos would be the fat man. Anderson smirked, shaking his head as he studied the instructions in front of him. And this bit of folly? Domitian is king number 6 on their list. So while we're in Rome, we've been sent to look for his tomb. Monsieur de Arc, Anderson scoffed as he read the coded name aloud. You heard the tour guide, Geyer said as he rose from his seat at the table. After killing 1 million Jews, you build an ark to honor your triumph over God. Emperor Domitian seems a likely villain, doesn't he? Anderson grumbled and groaned and slid out of his seat with disdain. He checked his glass only to find it empty. And if we do find a body? Geyer chuckled. It means somebody is very wrong. Then let's go find out, Anderson said. Directions in hand, Anderson led Geyer around an immense building before finding the alleyway described in the instructions. Sure enough, they found a small entrance that led under the building. Why isn't the Texan doing this? He's young and stupid, Anderson complained. And also very big, Geyer said, producing the rope ladder, which he began securing to posts and pipes in the alley. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get out. There are days I wish Stewart would have left me for dead. Today will likely top all of them. Geyer dropped the ladder into the cavity leading under the building. No jokes about my wife today, are there? Anderson gritted his teeth as he began gingerly climbing into the hole. Geyer produced a small lamp and matches. Ready? Just send the fucking thing down to me. It smells like shit down here, Anderson barked. When Anderson lit the lamp, it revealed a sewer far more ornate than anything Geyer had ever seen elsewhere in the world. Anderson checked his diagram one more time. It should be straight ahead. Wish me luck, Carl. Good luck, Anderson. Don't leave me down here to die, Anderson added, and then stepped into the shadows. Geyer looked back toward the streets of Rome. No one took notice of a tourist leaning against the alley wall. For good measure, he patted the small pistol he tucked into his vest. 7 heads of the dragon, 7 hills upon the earth, 7 kings, 5 who were, 1 who is, and 1 who will be. Back in Scotland, it didn't take the scholar Ross McPherson long to find history books that described the tomb of the 10th Roman emperor who followed Caesar Augustus. If Anderson found a corpse right under the noses of the periphery, the Jesuits, and Eos, it meant they were very wrong about their theories. If Anderson found an empty tomb, it meant Eos, or the church, had already claimed one of the pieces to the end times prophecy. From below, he heard sloshing water. The ropes jerked, causing Geyer to clutch his chest in alarm. Still, none of the other tourists seemed to take note. Geyer, I'm here. Oh, thank God, Anderson said. I worried I would be lost down here forever. Now help me up. A few minutes later, the two leaned against the wall in front of the storm drain. Anderson was wet and reeked of filth. At first, all he could do was complain. Then his tone turned more reverential. So McPherson was right? Geyer asked. He was. I lost my bearings, but when I realized my mistake, I found it right where it was supposed to be. You found the hidden chamber. There used to be a hidden chamber, Anderson emphasized, but it has been cleared out. Even the names carved upon it were removed by hammer and chisel. Whoever took the body of Emperor Domitian wanted to make sure the world would forget about him. Whoever took the body. Somewhere in the darkness, the same enemy was hunting them. Chapter 11. Toronto, Italy, 1852. My head hurts, William Drummond thought in the dark chamber. I think I'm going to be sick. He found the edge of a stone sarcophagus and leaned against it to release the pressure of his tired legs. A few feet ahead, Carl Geyer continued his incessant question about the local guide's personal life. Why didn't we stay together? I miss the others. I should have Professor Morgan with me. His beautiful but boring Texan regarded the women back at the yacht, and Jamie Anderson, who refused to visit another ancient burial site, stayed back as well. Carl Geyer stood in the glow of Ross McPherson's lantern. A rush of saliva filled Stewart's mouth, followed by dizziness. He put his hands on his knees for balance, and then, in a sudden explosion that filled his nostrils, Stewart vomited on the stone floor, creating an impressive splash that extended several feet. Suddenly, his annoyance at the others was relieved as well. Are you okay? Geyer asked. Isn't it obvious? At least that shut up Geyer for a moment. He heard McPherson and the other guide returning, but a second wave of vomit, more through the nostrils, the worst, spewed before he could answer Geyer. By the time he cleared the mucus from his mouth, the others were standing at his side. Should we go back? Geyer asked. Nonsense, Stewart said, clearing his throat. I'm all pins and needles in anticipation of seeing what lies ahead. In truth, he vomited in fear. His belly had been all twisted up all morning because he feared another failure. Come, Lord Stewart, young Ross McPherson said to him. There's something up here that will certainly cheer you up. The defrocked priest stood just outside the pool of vomit. Of course, Stewart muttered. Show me what you found. The church is built atop the foundation of the old mausoleum, McPherson said as he led them back to the area he'd been studying. You were right about the Flavian family not being traditional Romans. They were indeed outsiders who served the Julian dynasty right up to the year of the 4 emperors. Back in Rome, we searched the ruins of Domitian's palace, but this home was always here in Toronto. This is the private mausoleum for his family. So I take it you found his corpse, Stewart said bitterly. McPherson chuckled and smugly said, Not exactly. Stewart followed him deeper into the structure. On the streets of Toronto, the building had been a simple church, but underground, its footprint was much larger. Stewart stepped through the thick foundation wall into an area meticulously shaped and quite empty. McPherson rushed over to the wall. He stood in a space where a sarcophagus could have been kept. At one time, this was sealed, McPherson began by pointing. This was likely sealed with secured metal doors, much more security than a typical burial site. Whoever was buried here was meant to stay here for perpetuity. You can see where the hinges were once connected to the walls, as well as the pockmarks from the chisels or whatever they used to get the seal off. A sealed vault, Stewart asked, suddenly feeling better. A resting place for a king? The other chamber was most likely used for aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., but this vault was specifically made to make sure common folks did not have access. It's more like a treasure vault than a tomb, to be honest. Each of them took a moment to step inside the small space and look around. It was another dead end, yet Stewart felt uplifted by the discovery. McPherson continued. They've stolen everything of value, but I believe, based on the way this room was constructed, that this was more than just a mausoleum. It was a place of worship. A place of worship? Stewart asked. McPherson only beckoned him closer. In reading the Roman biographies about Domitian, the chronicles spoke about his macabre dinner parties being so funereal that his guests worried about being scared to death. Instead of worshiping the Roman gods of old, Domitian chose to worship an obscure deity, a god with 4 heads. McPherson's finger did not lift from the wall, and Stewart leaned in closer. Sure enough, the carved relief showed a mutated human with 4 heads. Macabre indeed. The defrocked priest removed his finger to rush to the other side. A chisel destroyed the names above each alcove. Vandalism? Oh no. This was methodical, or else all the macabre art would have been destroyed too. So you think Domitian was kept in one of those 4 alcoves? No, McPherson said, stepping to the center. I think Domitian's body was brought from Rome and placed here in the center of the chamber. You can see the outline upon the floor where his sarcophagus was likely kept. I think this was a place of worship before his death. After his death, he was sealed up with the others. What about those spaces on either wall from Domitian? Imagine all 4 sarcophagi placed in the 4 corner alcoves of this chamber. In the center, that is where they placed Domitian, and in front and behind him are 2 spaces reserved that remained empty. He paused. Have you done the math? 7 spaces for 7 kings. But it's empty, Geyer noted the obvious. So is that good for us or bad? Stewart patted McPherson on the shoulder. This is good, Carl. Even though it was emptied long ago, it means at one point 5 of the bodies were gathered together. The kings from our list? Yes, Carl, Stewart said with a groan. Is it possible that Domitian had already found the 5 kings that existed before him? McPherson shook his head. Obviously, the corpse of the first king hadn't been found yet, which is why I think the space is made for his body. Emperor Domitian had the power and might of the Roman Empire at his disposal, so if he knew whom to look for, he certainly could have sent his agents out looking. But we don't know if he found one or all 4, do we? If he worshipped a god with 4 heads, I think he likely found them, Stewart insisted. Which kings? Geyer asked. Stewart turned to McPherson and nodded. We don't know if our list matches the same figures that EO searches for, McPherson argued. But it is possible for the Romans to have access to the names from our list, isn't it? In theory, yes. Which names? Geyer insisted. Go ahead and tell him. We believe that the Sons of Darkness, as they were called by our friend in Rome, included Antiochus Epiphanes, Alexander the Great, Ramses the Great, and the legendary King Nimrod of ancient Babylon. Carl seemed satisfied by the answers. Is that why Nicolette chose him? To be the annoying veteran of theories? How did Domitian manage to find the 4 heads? Stewart asked. McPherson rubbed his receding hairline for inspiration, and then a smile flashed in his face. Remember, the Flavian family was not part of the Roman royalty, which is why Rome eventually turned on them and refused Domitian a traditional funeral. By 95 AD, the Roman Empire extended into Egypt and Greece and had access to Mesopotamia. The Flavians were servants of the Julian dynasty until chaos allowed them to step up. I would assume that before Vespasian seized power, he had this shrine built here in Toronto. Then the stars aligned for the family. Father, brother, and Domitian all rose to power. Why would you worship Roman gods when the gods of your forefathers guided you to power? McPherson knelt down to inspect the outline of the centered sarcophagus. Even though Domitian was an outsider, he strengthened the Roman Empire. Historians say it never ran so efficiently, and because of this, it began to expand. One of his greatest feats was the temporary conquest of a large island in the Atlantic. Atlantis? Stewart asked too quickly. Even in finding the chamber empty, its existence inspired him. McPherson scoffed and laughed. Then, remembering his position, he grew solemn. No, my lord, I was speaking of Britannia. He did what few rulers have ever done. He conquered Scotland. It didn't last, but then again, neither did Domitian. He killed his own assassin and died childless, which allowed Rome to create a new dynasty. Rome had no love for this man, and palaces he built in his own name were quickly claimed. I'm sure his loyal servants had no other choice than to bring his corpse here, where it could be kept safe. Safe? Apparently not, Geyer chuckled. So where did they take Domitian's body? I wish Professor Morgan were here, McPherson suddenly said. Back in Scotland, they were theological rivals, since Morgan was an expert in northern mythology. He'd know the answer better than I. Morgan? Stewart asked, thinking of the other expedition. Alas, I wish they were with us also. Apparently, he wasn't the only one thinking fondly of the others. McPherson stood. After Domitian died in 96 A.D., the Roman Empire slowly began to crumble, yet still managed to hold on for another few centuries. In the cruel winter of 487, two enemies descended on Rome, forever ending the ancient Roman Empire as we know it. A barbarian named Odoacer swept into Italy, conquering the city of Rome before making the capital city of Ravenna his new home. This barbarian didn't last long. Another enemy of Rome, Theodoric the Great, stole the whole of Italy away from Odoacer, who withdrew to his stronghold in Ravenna. At a banquet meant to celebrate the defeat of the Roman Empire, Theodoric slew Odoacer and claimed all of Italy, including this mausoleum, as his property. My belief in Father McPherson is paying off. He's a wonder. So who is this Theodoric fellow? That's the curious part. Before we departed Mirthley, Professor and I had a poignant conversation about a family. At first, that family came out of the north with sudden and wild ambition. About the time the Flavian family was likely gathering the four kings together, this northern family began a generational conquest. And with each generation, as the power of Rome lessened, their power grew. What are you talking about? Stewart demanded. The Goths. They came out of a small village in Sweden and invaded Europe. By the 4th century, they divided up into two separate branches, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. While the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, the Ostrogoths of Theodoric finished the job. It seems Domitian's invasion of Scotland woke the sleeping giant. Goths, Geyer voiced the word. Goths, McPherson repeated. This mausoleum was not plundered. It was carefully extracted and carried away. Carried away. So my theory is true. The bodies are being carefully preserved. I take it they didn't carry it to Scotland. Not that I've heard, my lord. McPherson took in good humor. Is our quest at an end? Or do you have an inkling where they might have taken Domitian's corpse? Once again, McPherson measured his words. I wish I had Professor Morgan to make this a bit clear, but I have a pretty good idea where to go next. Ravenna, the stronghold of the Goths. And how far is Ravenna? You're in luck. It's just a few days' travel up the coast of Italy from here. Chapter 12, Ravenna, Italy, 1852. Jamie Anderson understood monsters. He'd spent his entire life being stared at for being a dwarf. Despite his maintained ebony hair, his manicured flesh, and his unnecessarily expensive clothing, strangers either chuckled or gasped at him. Chuckles didn't bother him as much as the expressions of fear. Having been part of the Napoleonic War, he didn't give two shits anymore about trying to change perceptions. But he still felt the eyes. Stewart was a fool for bringing me with him. I stick out like a sore thumb. He certainly didn't have any fear. Now middle-aged, he walked with an ebony walking stick with a sharp blade hidden under the hilt. Any unwanted attention could be handled, but for good measure, the young Texan walked beside him. Frank Penny wasn't large like Antoine Clement, but he was blessed with quickness and agility, something Anderson severely lacked, and six-shooters. Walking down the street with six-shooters at his side in a large leather holster and belt buckle almost the size of Anderson's head, Penny drew as much attention as a dwarf. The young man kept his mouth shut and followed orders. The two had never met until the young Texan showed up with Clement. The discipline at his age was disconcerting. A step ahead, the former priest, Ross McPherson, continued to second-guess Anderson by looking at a wrinkled paper filled with paper marks. Even though McPherson had lost his place in the world due to a tryst with a rich woman, his academic ego remained unharmed. It should be 2 more blocks. It's 3 blocks ahead and on the left. Whether arranging dinner or train travel, Anderson preferred to take Penny with him. When Anderson began a conversation and exotic Penny stood quietly with his vacant eyes, folks listened to him, sensing the respect the armed escort gave him. Standing beside McPherson turned him into some sort of odd parasite. Rich men traveling with a dwarf. Folks will eventually recognize the fool of Mirthley. Long ago, he played the part of the fool, but his years at Mirthley gave him skills beyond pleasuring the maids and curious female guests. With Lord Stewart away for so many years, he managed the estate. From financing to organizing, Anderson spent his days behind a desk, giving instructions. For this reason, Stewart insisted he come on the trip. Aside from managing the funding for the expedition, Anderson also arranged for all transportation. While the married couples enjoyed their evening together, Stewart's team of investigators visited all the places written down on McPherson's paper. Perhaps it's another block, Anderson offered after McPherson almost spun himself dizzy trying to understand his error. We should have brought Professor Morgan with us instead of sending him west with Clement, Anderson decided. Whereas McPherson believed himself to be an expert in all matters under heaven, Morgan spent his academic career chasing down a fairly epic legend, Eos. After Joseph Nicolet's death, the Auguste Edouard portrait arrived, sending Stewart into a frenzy that brought Corey Morgan into their lives. The more alcohol the two consumed as they stared up from the couch at the silhouette of Nicolet, the stranger the theories became. Neither asked Anderson his thoughts, yet he listened and remembered details. Professor Morgan excitedly read from an Icelandic poetry book about an epic battle between the Goths and Attila the Hun deep in modern-day Romania. How would that tale end up in Iceland if the Goths didn't maintain a connection to their Nordic homeland? While Anderson mixed drinks for the two, they concocted theories that connected survivors of the Genesis flood to the colony of Atlantis and survivors of the Atlantis cataclysm to the colony of Boreas. The people of the North Wind stayed to themselves for a millennia or more until something woke the sleeping bear from its slumber. Morgan speculated it was the expanding Roman Empire or Christianity, while Stewart argued it was King Solomon and his quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Regardless, the Boreans became the Goths, and the Goths conquered Rome and took the stolen loot to the shrine of Uath in Ravenna, which Anderson now sought. It's not going to look like Stonehenge, Anderson teased. These people probably busted up any shrine to make foundations for the houses we're looking at now. McPherson put his hands on his hips. There's a church over there. Let's check it out. The Shrine of Uoth isn't going to be a church, Anderson insisted. Penny gave him no help, so they followed McPherson. They found a basilica with a tall bell tower, all built in recent years. If Ravenna had once been a Gothic stronghold, then it would still be considered sacred by its contemporary adherents, the Order of Eos. For this reason, Stewart didn't show his face, leaving the inspection to his men. This church is only a few hundred years old, Anderson noted. Of course, McPherson began. When Gaston de Foix and the French invaded Ravenna, they likely leveled everything in sight during the siege. You remember what that historian said about the Battle of Ravenna? Fuck you. Anderson remembered the story from earlier in the morning. The local historian told them all about the 1512 Battle of Ravenna, but mainly focused on the omen of the monster of Ravenna. 3 centuries later, the disgusting details about a deformed child remained long after the details about the Goth invaders had faded away. The citizens of Ravenna believed the apocalypse was at hand after a monster worthy of being Satan's child was born. With a horn on its forehead, wings, clawed feet, and a third eye, the deformed child was viewed as a bad omen and a sign of God's wrath. Shortly after, the French marched on Ravenna, leveling the town despite a fierce defense by the local Italians. All the while the local historian told the tale, he stared at Jamie Anderson. Over here, look, it's a hidden plaza, McPherson said. It's private property, Anderson insisted as McPherson walked around the left side of the church's front plaza and through a slight opening that led to a wooded plaza. From the streets, it was shielded, but slipping between the church and the new apartment buildings, they found a specimen of old Ravenna. The trees, while towering and massive, had likely regrown in the past 3 centuries as well. But the reason nothing had been built in the space was obvious. It's like a shorter version of Stonehenge, isn't it? McPherson asked smugly. Fortune smiles on the fools, Anderson decided about McPherson's luck. It's what we're looking for. Is this what we were looking for? Frank Penny finally spoke. Yes, my dear boy. I believe it is, Anderson admitted. After insults and a wild goose chase, Anderson's mood finally improved when he realized McPherson really did know what he was doing. What do you think? McPherson asked before he rushed ahead to inspect the geographical oddity. Among the benches, herb gardens, and cascading trees, 7 boulders rose in the garden, each buried up to its neck, leaving only table-sized platforms in the garden yard. Once, before the church and apartments were built around it, the massive boulders would have likely given any man, Christian or pagan, pause. McPherson found a book on Gothic myths and legends, which told of a shrine to their god. Although the original name was lost to modernized translations of Odin or Jupiter, the title for the shrine, Uoth, inspired Stewart once McPherson translated it. Raging, holy, ghostly host. Anderson immediately knew Stewart's interpretation. While Odin was famous for sending out his Valkyries to gather the slain heroes from the battlefield to bring to Valhalla, his Hall of the Dead, Stewart and Morgan found a unique variation of the legend that fit the purposes of Eos, collecting 7 kings. I'm glad my French forefathers pillaged this damnable place, Anderson answered bitterly. Between the monster of Ravenna and this shrine of Uoth, the Goths deserve to be driven out. So you agree this shrine was once the shrine of Uoth? McPherson asked. I do, Anderson said. Do you happen to know where the Goths went from here? McPherson shook his head. If the Goths really did sack Rome and Toronto in order to carry away the sacred treasure known as Uoth, it's all gone. Whether it was the French in 1512 or someone else 1,000 years earlier. There's nothing left in Ravenna to find. This will devastate Lord Stewart. We've reached a dead end, Penny said, looking around the closed plaza. Anderson couldn't tell if the pun was accidental, but he laughed just the same. You boys don't know Lord Stewart as well as I know him. The man is independently wealthy and unable to live a sedentary life. All this means is more paperwork for me as I prepare for the next stage of our journey. But we don't know where the Goths went after their defeat in 1512. It matters not, Anderson insisted, and began the long walk back to the others. Lord Stewart has 7 names and 7 destinations on that list of his. We might have reached a dead end with Emperor Domitian, but there are other names to investigate. Chapter 13. Thessaloniki, Macedonia, 1852. Lady Christina Battersby Drummond Stewart woke hours before she intended to. First, she had to frantically find the wastebasket in order to spew the 2 bottles worth of debauchery. Despite the basket almost tipping over during her second heaving torment of vomit, she kept her cabin floor clean. Next, she had to deal with the cause of her early awakening, a throbbing leg muscle. She'd angered it just by rolling over quickly in bed, and now it was fully awake. Just below her hip, on the inside of her right thigh, the tendon throbbed like a second heartbeat. If she had kept her knees together, which had certainly not been the case last night, the pain wasn't so bad, but swinging her legs out made her see spots. This certainly won't do. Rising from bed and taking shuffling steps, she dealt with the mistakes of the previous night, including the scattered pillows and sheets from the other side of the bed. As she prepared to step out of the cabin into the upper decks of the yacht, she tried to remember who'd she'd taken as a lover the previous night. She'd gotten quite drunk after they arrived in port at Thessaloniki, and with so many fine eating and drinking establishments right off the docks, she'd gotten carried away. Lord Stewart had immediately gotten to planning the itinerary for the latest port. Like a king holding court, he sent his knights scurrying back and forth into the city. After holding court for a few hours, he'd gone to bed early in preparation for a long day of travel ahead. It wasn't my husband who slept in my bed. For breakfast, she didn't need to be glamorous, but it still took a while to be presentable as befitting a lady. When she was finally suitable, she hobbled to the doorway, took a deep breath to prepare herself for the pain, and then walked as normally as she could down the hall to the yacht, up the stairs, into the dining room. What time is it? Although she could smell breakfast, several of the tables had been cleared, which meant she was one of the last ones to wait. She turned to one of the servants and said, "Coffee, please. Oh, how I need coffee." She was on her second cup when Jamie Anderson entered the dining room. He gave a malicious grin upon seeing her. He knows. "May I join you for breakfast?" "Only if you don't speak. I have a terrible headache." "Yes, that's quite understandable. I'll meditate on the day's tasks until you need conversation." It wasn't him. Sir Jamie had been sent with Sir Frank into the city, stealing away the handsome Texan for the evening. So it wasn't Mr. Penny either. "Where is everybody?" she finally asked. Jamie took several moments to study her before finally answering her. "Lord Stewart, Mr. Geyer, Father McPherson, and Mr. Penny have all booked passage for a tour of ancient Pella." All she needed to do was furrow her brow for him to continue speaking. After 30 years of living under the same roof as Anderson, they knew each other better than husband and wife. Anderson explained. "Pella is the home of Alexander the Great, one of the kings of yore we're so interested in learning about. Lord Stewart is simply being thorough, for Alexander the Great has been a subject of curiosity for centuries, and more curious scholars than we have already been here. It should be a quick and safe trip." The young dark-haired waitress with the dimples and slender hips took their breakfast order. Since leaving Ravenna, she'd learned most of the crew of the yacht. But suddenly, she couldn't even remember the poor girl's name. Ugh. What's so interesting about Alexander the Great that made my husband come all this way? Alexander the Great was a genius. Now I understand. For a decade after reaching puberty, the young lordling looked for adventure in beautiful bodies or faces. One of these adventures left her with her son George. As a servant in the Stewart household, she never dreamed of keeping him to herself. Even though he shocked Scottish society by marrying the peasant girl, he quickly chased after new adventures. Later in life, Lord Stewart looked for mysterious enigmas like Antoine Clement. His most recent phase had been intellectuals, professors, priests, and scientists who could share the unknown with him. Anderson continued. Alexander the Great was more than just a genius, though. We're here because Alexander seemed prescient enough to be able to tie the past to the future. Alexander was fascinated by Ramses the Great, Nimrod, and the nameless kings of old, which motivated him to leave Macedonia to go out and conquer these mighty empires, just so he could have a first-hand look at their secrets. He's the one from the Bible? She asked. Father McPherson had told her about Alexander the Great during the passage to Greece. Yes. While many scholars feel the Book of Daniel is revisionist history, if it was indeed an authentic prophecy, then there is no doubt that Alexander the Great was the fulfillment of the prophecy. She vocalized, despite the details boring her. Was my lover Father McPherson? Christina tried to place where she'd been the previous night. She'd flirted with him plenty, but even though he lost his priestly collar, he remained aloof to her efforts, if not even insulted by them. It would have taken a lot of alcohol to seduce him, and he was either sitting at the table with her husband or running into town on missions. And what are they trying to learn? A few things. Despite reaching a dead end with Emperor Domitian, your husband feels emboldened about his beliefs for the five kings. First, they're going to confirm a few possible burial sites. The mystery of Alexander's resting place and his great golden sarcophagus has baffled treasure hunters for centuries now, and Lord Stewart is only going to places that have already been written about. But who knows? Perhaps they'll stumble across a hidden passage. Miracles happen. Like the miracle of a woman my age finding a lover. They're hoping to find clues to understand the motivations of Alexander the Great. It appears as if our boy genius general swept through ancient Babylon, Israel, and Egypt with occult ideas in his head. But once he dominated these kingdoms, he didn't go home. He set his sights on the East. Oh, please no trips to the Orient. She knew the dangers that motivated their hasty trip, yet she missed home. The waitress brought their breakfast, and for a few moments they both grew silent. Realizing the conversation had stalled, she asked, "So what's in the East?" "That's what your husband wants to understand. Alexander took his army on a legendary invasion all the way to India." "Please tell me we're not going to India." Anderson chuckled. "No, I'll be spending the rest of the day with the captain of the yacht, making plans to sail to Egypt." The captain's face came into mind. He, too, was middle-aged, although completely bald. He was lean and witty. No, not him. Although they flirted over dinner, the captain immediately departed the ship to deal with the needs of the yacht. "Good," she finally answered, adding, "Why did Alexander travel to India?" Anderson never ceased to impress her. Like herself, he'd begun as a servant. And despite foul behavior and language from time to time, he proved to be organized and could remember details verbatim. India wasn't his destination. He thought it would be the path of least resistance. He tried to pass through a northern route to the Himalaya mountains, the infamous Gates the Magagoli. Both weather and renegade tribes stopped him, so he took his mighty army to the south. If his men hadn't mutinied, his plans had been to travel through the Punjab region to find a holy mountain called the Navel of the Universe. Navel? Christina gasped, remembering the waiter. The young man had been delivering their supper meal to the table when she turned and placed her forearm into his crotch. Laughter ensued, and for the next 2 hours he became the subject of teasing and her flirtation. Did I end up sleeping with him? And why was Alexander looking for this navel? You know, he wanted to understand the secrets of the universe, just like William. Powerful men like to know who's holding their strings. For Alexander, he followed the stories of an early tribe of man finding enlightenment there. What kind of enlightenment? She asked, remembering how the men had escorted her from the table at the restaurant. Too much wine required a steady hand, but the docks had been slippery, and her flat-bottomed shoe had slid out awkwardly to the side, creating a painful pop in her groin muscle. After she collapsed onto the ground, she sat there awaiting help. I've only heard them talk about these legends, Anderson hedged. I don't know if I have the details right. I doubt many of the details will make sense to me, but tell me anyway until my mind is clear. I need a distraction from my present condition. Of course, he grinned playfully. When you overlay all these legends, the basic narrative is that there once was an old kingdom ruled by a powerful man. This great sorcerer learned of his fate through some oracle of old, but instead of accepting it, he rejected it and went to war with the Creator. God? Some see it that way. His fate was to be part of the world's destruction. So he learned as much truth and magic as a human can learn during a life, and when death finally came for him, he did something no other human had done. He trapped his own soul. Why? Again, the overlapping legends and lore describe a spiritual river that brings souls to the realm of the dead. But his soul did not make the journey. He used his magic to keep it from descending, and thus he's caught in limbo between life and death. And the prophecy involving the end of the world is also caught in limbo. These kings we seek, they are the ones your husband knows of because they are part of our history. But this sorcerer king, no one knows where to find him after the legendary destruction of the old kingdom. Are you familiar with the tale of Pandora? Of course, it's where all you men place your misogyny. A gentleman with white gloves had helped her up with a smile and a mischievous glint in his eye. When Christina fell down onto the deck, her cleavage almost came spilling out, and as she lifted her hand to her helper, she noted he looked down at her breasts. While Pandora is a Greek telling of the tale, there's another tales that mention how a young woman, survivor of this great disaster, brought with her wisdom from the old kingdom. She intended her writing to be a guide for future generations, a way to avoid leading the world into another disaster. She gathered all the knowledge of the old kingdom into a document known as the Pythos, so that after her death, her children would know what to avoid. Instead, her words did the opposite, leading evil men to seek the ancient places of the old world. Let me guess. The navel of the universe. Apparently, in a hidden cave at this mountain, there are black stones upon which the code of the universe is written. Code of the universe? Everything that has happened, is happening, or will happen is written down in stone, including the designs of each and every creature. If you destroy these black stones, you destroy the future. Or the past? Christina mocked. Anderson nodded unknowingly. Using the Pythos, Pandora's evil children began to scour the world seeking the answers. They found a few relics to affirm her story, but it was her own words that undid her cautionary tale. Even though the world is different from the old kingdom, her description of the stars allowed her children to know the line upon which the old kingdom aligned with our current world. The world is a big place, but it's getting smaller and smaller thanks to new inventions, and our enemies are racing towards oblivion. I don't understand. Are we trying to stop these prophecies? Jamie Anderson slid his juice aside and signaled the waiter. Could I get a little gin? Make that 2, Christina added. My heart breaks for poor Pandora. In the Greek version, she's just a curious idiot. In your version, she's simply trying to protect her children, only to do the opposite. I feel I'm doing the same thing on this trip. William still fascinates me. He was a wonder to me when I was a young woman, and even now he is a wonder to me. But I know I bore him. I know I don't interest him. I know deep down he sees me as a peasant. I know he still sees me as a whimpering dwarf. What of it? We're with him, aren't we? Yes, but I'm afraid I've messed things up just like Pandora. You're referencing the bosun? Anderson asked with raised eyebrows. Bosom. The handsome young man that had rushed from the yacht had been the ship's bosun. Unlike the waitstaff, the bosun had been a mystery to her still. He'd been working with his deck crew on repairs for the boat when they were called over to help Lady Stewart back to the ship. She'd gone on and on about his title, and after a grin at her bosom, she took things too far. When the gin arrived, she slammed hers back in one sip. We've never been truly husband and wife. Even before I gave him George, he was never mine and I was never his, but on this trip, I wanted to make him mine. But he only has room in his heart for a ghost now. Jean-Nicolas Nicolet, the only one to deny him. Strangely enough, I was hoping this trip could prove my worth to him. Yet off he goes with others while I sit here with the women. Some hero am I. Can we get rid of him? Lord Stewart? No, the bosun. I don't want to see his face lest I remember what I did last night. Oh, but he was so handsome and young. Can you remove him from the ship? Jamie Anderson took a drink from his gin. Aside from his misshapen ears and slightly beaked nose, he had a perfect face, freshly shaved. His expressive brow, kind eyes, and broad smile would have made for the face of Lancelot. Only he didn't have a diminutive body. Removing him from the yacht could prove a little difficult. Before we left Ravenna, each member of the crew signed on for a one-year tour, with pay bonuses dependent on numerous levels of secrecy. Even though none of them know what we're doing or where we're going, they know it's clandestine and dangerous. Removing him from the crew could create a security risk. You wouldn't have him killed, would you? She asked with concern. Fortunately, Anderson had a hearty, earnest laugh at the suggestion. No, but I also couldn't send him home. I'd have to send him to some private location for the duration of the contract, but he could put us in danger if he didn't follow directions. Oh, please, don't bother. Unlike William, she didn't want to keep her former lovers around as trophies. It's not like it's the first time I committed adultery. I just didn't want him to think it was something that it wasn't. I'll speak with him and explain matters. A small bonus might help him ignore you for the rest of the trip. Could you? Consider it dealt with. With the matters of the injured groin muscle and mystery of her lover solved, Christina turned to her remaining breakfast for a few minutes before revisiting the unresolved matter. So which side of the matter are we on? Are we trying to stop this prophecy from happening, or are we serving the prophecy? Jamie lifted the empty gin glass. He waited to answer her until it had been refilled and half emptied. Apparently, we were on the verge of taking hold of the prophecy a decade ago before Nicolette asked the same question. He claimed to know the location of the great sorcerer's tomb, and the tool needed to wake him. But his philosophical question stayed his hand. Anderson took a big swig of gin. Do you remember Lord Stewart's trip to the Holy Lands? How could I forget? He set me aside for his Cree lover. She nodded. He tried to find answers for Nicolette and discovered the lore explaining why Io searched for the great sorcerer. On the other side of the coin, the church also knew about the prophecy. Some factions wanted to claim it, and others wanted to destroy it. But isn't the prophecy tied to the Antichrist? Jamie raised an eyebrow. Do you see why Nicolette delayed? Once Clement is done dealing with our enemies, he will ascertain what Nicolette found, securing it if necessary. Our mission is similar. While we're learning about the legacy of these kings, we'll take hold of the prophecy so that our enemies don't do something foolish. Well, this conversation alone is far more interesting than anything that happened back at Mirthley Castle, Christina scoffed. Please distract me. Find something, anything, to get my mind off of current matters. Jamie looked past the yacht to the city that was waking. The city was one of the first cities to become Christian. The Apostle Paul wrote 2 epistles to the people of Thessaloniki. That's not what I need, Jamie. Not after last night. I'm not one for religion either. Okay, well, Anderson finished his gin. I have one. The city is named after Alexander the Great's sister, Thessaloniki, which I can tell from your expression does not interest you, Anderson chuckled. But let me tell you a bit of dirt about his sister. Alexander's father had several wives, so the palace likely had more drama and intrigue than as an Italian yacht. Jamie winked at her eye roll. Alexander the Great's best friend and general, Cassander, ended up marrying Princess Thessaloniki, but soon both Cassander and the Macedonians began to question Alexander's loyalty to his homeland, so much so that his own family began to plot against him, and after his return from India, he was poisoned. By whom? No one knows, but it is believed that his brother-in-law Cassander not only benefited, but also did his best to destroy many of the occult projects started by Alexander. So Cassander was trying to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, like us. I suppose that's true. There is a legend that after her brother's death, Thessaloniki was transformed into a mermaid, and when she approached a ship, she would inquire about her brother, asking, "Is Alexander the Great alive?" If the crew answered in the affirmative, she would swim away. But if they answered in the negative, she would transform into a gorgon and turn the ship and crewmen to stone. I'm not sure what to make of that story. If she does make an appearance on our passage to Egypt, at least now you know what to say. Jamie Anderson winked and rose. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for today. That's the end of part 2.